Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this Sinclair Town Hall, Your Voice, Your Future, the All and Y'all. I'm John Carlos Estrada, anchor for CBS Austin News. Tonight, we have invited Texas lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, as well as a diverse group of their constituents, to discuss recently passed laws impacting the LGBTQIA+ Texans. The ACLU says that the 88th Texas legislative session saw more than 50 bills filed to do with this community. 3 bills made it through both the House and the Senate, all 3 getting the governor's signature and now set to become law. While some say that these new measures are meant to protect Texans, others say they do irreparable harm. Let's start this conversation with our reporter Michael Atkinson. He is going to break down those bills for us and has a look at the contentious session that they created at the Texas Capitol.
In a whirlwind session with attention on tax cuts and education reform, few issues garnered as much attention as legislation focused on the LGBTQ community.
How would you describe how this last session was when it comes to LGBTQ policies?
Heartbreaking, frustrating.
When it comes to LGBTQ policies this past session, 3 bills stick out. Senate Bill 12 had originally been written to ban drag in front of minors, but it was rewritten to broadly ban sexually explicit performances in front of minors. Senate Bill 14 bans gender-related treatment like hormones and puberty blockers for minors. And Senate Bill 15 extends a ban from last session on trans women from participating in women's sports, now excluding them from college athletics.
NCAA has been threatening for years to take competitions away from states. They've never followed through with those threats.
Governor Greg Abbott saying such policies are protecting, not hindering the rights of Texans.
We will continue to advance policies that protect children, that protect women in sports, but protect all Texans and their freedoms.
The so-called drag ban changed radically over the course of session as lawmakers broadened it to ban sexually explicit performances in front of minors entirely, so as to avoid a constitutional challenge for specifically targeting drag performers. Skeptics have questioned if it's now too broad and possibly banning kids from seeing, say, the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders from performing.
You talk about the enormous difference between having a young child sitting in front of a man in a G-string, and on the other hand, sitting up in the bleachers of the Dallas Cowboys stadium. It's a totally false comparison.
But it was arguably the ban on gender treatment for trans minors that garnered the most pushback, including the dramatic climax of the session when as many as 300 LGBTQ activists were expelled from the Capitol for demonstrating in the House gallery.
We were treated in ways that people had never really seen a group of people treated in the Capitol before. And to me, that points to the attitude that a lot of state leaders have in this state towards our community.
That bill takes effect in September. Minors currently on treatment like puberty blockers or hormones will have to be weaned off over time. A study from UCLA estimates that to be nearly 30,000 Texas minors. The ACLU of Texas is working on a lawsuit to stop that bill.
This fight is far from over, and there are thousands of people that are going to keep turning out and fighting until it's safe for everybody to be here.
In Austin, Michael Atkinson, CBS Austin News.
I'm joined now by my co-host for this evening, a journalist who's been on top of the very busy legislative cycle, Texas Tribune reporter Will Machado. Good evening, Will.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Alongside us for this important discussion are some faces and organizations that have been the forefront of those debates. Democratic State Senator Sarah Eckhart, who represents Austin, Democratic State Representative James Tellerico, who represents the Round Rock area, and Mary Elizabeth Castle, Director of Government Relations for Texas Values Action, Michelle Evans, Round Rock Chapter Leader for Independent Women's Network. Thank you all for being with us. And in our audience tonight, we will get the opportunity to ask our panelists questions and engage in the discussion. Jansen Woodley, Director of Development with the Equality Alliance, Celia Light, drag entertainer from the Austin area, and Elisa Roth Weigel, writer and LGBTQIA+ political activist. And we have 3 members of the Williamson County GOP joining us, Laura Davis, Leslie Winters, and Shauna Kenningham. When you would like to jump into the conversation, please raise your hand and we'll get that microphone to you. So thank you again for being with us. In the search for fairness and balanced storytelling, we did reach out to several Texas lawmakers, including several that had hands in these laws, and invited them to participate in our town hall tonight. So let's get things off with Will. As you just heard, 3 of the bills of more than 50 proposed during this legislative session. I know that you've been covering this. What can you tell us about those bills?
Yeah, so in this session we saw kind of a broad swath of bills targeting the LGBTQ community according to advocates, and the legislature this year banned puberty blockers and hormone therapies for transgender kids, in addition to restricting which college sports teams trans athletes can join, which is an extension of a previous K through 12 ban. And additionally, that drag show bill that we've been hearing a lot about is a expansion of kind of the sexual conduct definition that some drag entertainers say will target them and their performances. So I'd like to start off the conversation here with Mary Elizabeth with Texas Values Action. Would you say this was a successful session for conservatives?
This was a very successful session, not just for family values, but for our children. Making sure that they're protected from harmful procedures, but making sure that all of our girls and women are protected in sports. Even with education, making sure that their rights are protected in education, that they can get a full education without being exposed to explicit materials. We're very happy with what the Texas legislature did for our family values and for our children.
I want to turn now to Senator Eckhart. Would you classify this session in terms of its LGBTQ plus legislation? How would you describe it?
I would not describe it as protection. It's protection to the point of suffocation and even dispelling from civil society. It's really more of a banishment than it is a protection. And that's very concerning from the standpoint of a democracy. We want to make sure that people have bodily autonomy and can express themselves and be who they genuinely are, and receive equal protection and honor under the law. These bills do exactly the opposite. They seek to hide these people, to malign them, even to make hatred of them patriotic in a way that's very, very concerning.
Yeah, I want to go back to a soundbite from Michael's piece from the governor. The governor said, "We will continue to advance policies that protect children, that protect women in sports, and protect all Texans and their freedoms." That last part I want to touch on. James, you want to jump in there?
Sure. What frustrates me the most is we have huge challenges in this state. We've got a historic teacher shortage. We've got educators leaving the profession at a record rate. We have the highest number of uninsured people, including the highest number of uninsured children in the country. And we can't even keep the lights on when it gets cold or when it gets hot. And so instead of spending our precious legislative time, we only meet 5 months every other year, instead of spending that precious time solving these problems, bringing Democrats and Republicans together to actually do stuff for people, we're focused on these culture war bills that just pick on people because they're different. And so it's kind of maddening as a legislator that we're not spending our time solving problems.
Michelle Evans, you ran for office recently. What do you think of all this legislation?
I think it was a fairly successful year with regard to protecting women's rights and protecting the rights of every human in Texas to eventually have reproductive capacity, which is that is a liberty that the state has a stake in protecting. Some of these treatments that have been suggested as a standard of care for children who are identifying out of their biological sex do have catastrophic downstream effects, and we cannot ignore that fact. There are plenty of other countries that are reversing course after seeing the damage that has been done to minors that have undergone this type of what is being called healthcare, and I would argue it's not healthcare. But I think it's time for Texans to be realistic about that. It's not, I don't want to be hyperbolic about it. I don't think that this is banishing anybody from society. I think everybody's free to express themselves in whatever way they feel most comfortable. You can wear what you want. You can grow your hair as long as you want. You can, be in society fully authentic in however you want to express that. But when you start to get into medical procedures that have very severe side effects, I think that we really have to take a very long look at that.
I want to give the audience maybe a chance if you guys, has anyone raised their hand? Okay.
I did, yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Alicia, And I'm actually wearing the same dress that I wore back in 2017 when I came out for the first time as an intersex person in a Texas Senate hearing that ultimately led to the demise of the bathroom bill. At the time, I was advocating against that bill because it would hurt my trans friends, but also because it erased the existence of intersex people like me who are born with physical anatomical traits that don't fit neatly into an MRF box on a birth certificate. I first shared my story that day. I've shared it every subsequent legislative session since about how I was forced sterilized as an infant because my internal reproductive organs don't match what a host of people think a woman's body should contain. And by being forced sterilized as an infant, it led me down a road of a whole host of other healthcare complications, but also it led me to a life of secrecy and shame, having to live in hiding simply for being different. And what I want to point out about this bill that is certainly not protecting women like me, it certainly didn't protect children like me and wouldn't, because the way that this bill is drafted, it prevents hormones and surgeries for people who actively want this. It's life-saving health care for people who want it with their consent, but it contains specific language that allows these same hormones and same surgeries to be forced non-consensually onto children like me who never asked for them in the first place. And because of that explicit language that's written into these bills, I guess my question is, if these bills aren't about protecting children, because they're certainly not if they allow you to force surgeries and hormones onto intersex children, which represent 2% of our population here in Texas, then what really is the goal of these bills?
I want to see if you guys wanted to answer that.
Yes, well, these bills are very explicit about its purpose, which is to stop the gender modification, the sex change operations on children because of gender dysphoria. These bills are very clear that these are not about certain cases where you may have a child that has different sex characteristics at birth. This is very clear that this is about making sure that when a child comes to a parent and they're experiencing some type of mental distress, that we're taking care of that mental distress with therapy and counseling and not changing their bodies before they're able to make that decision as an adult.
I want to share with you guys an interview that we did with the father of a trans child, so if you guys want to listen here.
My son doesn't live here because he lives in Hawaii with his mom because we needed to send him to a state that would protect him. I'm a proud Texan and I love Texas, but this will be one that I won't forgive, ever.
One of the arguments made on the Senate floor in support of SB 14.
Children who are on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones need more counseling and love. They don't need blades and drugs.
So just to give you some context there, we've already covered this topic a little bit. That was State Senator Donna Campbell, who is an emergency room physician. Now, I do want to say her argument goes against several accredited physician groups, including the American Academy of Pediatrics. SB 14 was by far the most contentious and one of the most heavily debated among lawmakers. Will, you cover this?
Yeah, and as we saw in earlier, that there was a lot of really contentious debate. There were several activists that were arrested as a result of protesting at the Capitol. I also spoke with lots of supporters of Senate Bill 14 who had driven from across the state to come show their support in Austin. And I guess one of the things that I'd like to speak with you all about is how would you characterize this debate? Michelle, you were talking about how there was a need to essentially look at medical treatments more closely. Yet I'm curious for our Democrats here, do you feel like there was a substantive medical debate that was had on the House floor or the Senate floor?
I don't believe that there was substantive scientific medical acknowledgement at all. And that's very concerning, that we are entering a time in the state of Texas where we are so distrustful that we won't listen to the science or the medical associations that could best advise us. We are relying on our own personal feelings rather than being data-driven, I very much agree that we should take a look at medical procedures and, as a state, assure that that we have a standard of care for everyone in the state of Texas. But this is a well-recognized area of inquiry, and without recognizing it, we are driving doctors out of the state of Texas. We are driving physicians as well as their patients, as well as their patients' families outside of the state of Texas, as we just saw. And this at a time where we're already seeing a dearth of medical practitioners across the state. We are, as Representative Tallarico stated, the most uninsured state in the nation. And it's becoming a real problem for being able to access quality care in the state of Texas.
And Michelle, I'd like to just pass back to you here. Do you think there was kind of a good debate that you felt in terms of the science behind gender-affirming care?
I think that we had a very robust debate in the House and Senate hearings, and then subsequently on the House floor. I think that Dr. Oliverson provided a lot of feedback about concerns and questions that came to him from the back mic. I would argue that this is not a quality of care issue. I don't think that potentially sterilizing or chemically castrating children or amputating their healthy body parts is ever quality. And we have to recognize the fact that these medical associations are lobbying organizations. They are not set to provide specific standards of care for each individual case. They can provide opinions, but they don't often poll all of their members in order to do that. And they have, most of them are quite captured. If we talk about things like WPATH, that's an activist organization mostly. It does have some therapists, some psychiatrists and psychologists and medical doctors, but it's mostly made up of people who would consider themselves activists for trans care.
Representative Tallarico, I want to bring you into the conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I think parents and doctors are better equipped to make decisions about a child's health care than politicians in the state legislature. The fact that we are, as political leaders, overruling parents in the state of Texas and deciding for them what health care is right for their kid is unconscionable. I think parental rights are sacred. I think the most important job in the world is being a parent. And the fact that politicians want to undermine parents in Texas should outrage all of us, regardless of what political party you're in. Parents, in consultation with the doctor, should decide what health care is best for a kid. And I should say, we don't have any pediatricians that serve in the Texas legislature. We don't have any pediatric endocrinologists, who are the experts in this field, serving in the legislature. And so you've got a bunch of non-experts making decisions for the experts. I mean, this is what drives people crazy about politics.
May I ask a question? Are you a parent?
I'm not a parent
Okay.
yet, no.
Would you consider yourself an expert in parental rights?
No, that's why I trust parents to make decisions about their kids. And the fact that you've got politicians, Republican politicians, thinking they know what's best for a kid better than the parent. You just heard from a parent who said they've now got to leave the state because of this policy. And so I'm just saying, I'm not a parent yet. I hope to one day be. But I know enough to know that parents need to be respected in the state.
Yeah, I want to bring the audience in. I know we have a couple of parents in the audience. Is there someone that wants to? Oh, Celia.
Hello. I am not a parent, but I am a child. I am a child of my parents. And there's two things I'd like to bring up before I ask my question. In the response to Alicia's question, intersex children were once again left out of the conversation. And in response to what gender-affirming care is for minors, no one is looking to chemically castrate a child. No one is looking to put them through that kind of surgery. That's not what gender-affirming care for children is. And I feel like pushing forward that misconception is what makes this debate a debate. That's not what it is. And my question to you is, when they say they need therapy and they need love and they need care, I absolutely agree. But my thing is who is dictating the kind of therapy that they are getting? Is it from a religious pundit who is going to tell them that they're wrong and hateful and that they should be ashamed of themselves, and anything that they've ever known inside of their own body and their own mind is being told that everything about them is incorrect? You're saying that you're for them to express themselves, to love themselves, to know that who they are. But when you take away the chance for a child to really express themselves through hormone and puberty blockers, which taking that away would force them through a traumatic experience of going through the opposite gender's puberty. Can you imagine going through that as a teenager, the kinds of things that you would have to deal with if you were 13 years old and being pumped with testosterone when you know that's not what you want? It's traumatic, to say the least. And I guess my question is to you, are you then going a step further to making sure that those children are getting at least the open-ended care, that they're getting therapy where they're able to love themselves and care about one another? Or are you just leaving that once up again to other people that will say they need to be told that it's wrong?
Michelle or Mary Elizabeth?
I think there aren't in any of these bills any restrictions, at least in SB 14, on what sort of therapeutic care would be used for a child who is experiencing gender dysphoria. I don't consider puberty to be a physical disorder. I think that puberty is a very important, normal process that every child physically must go through in order to develop on a correct path. And I'm not saying correct as far as gender expression, I'm saying correct as far as physically healthy path. There is a lot that happens in that cascade of hormones during puberty that helps with brain development, that helps with bone structure. There is so much that goes on during puberty that I think is essential for good physical health and better life outcomes.
Yeah, so this is why I don't think this is a good faith discussion, because there are some European countries that have expressed some concern about gender affirming care, and those countries have decided to put some regulations in place, and common sense regulations in consultation with the medical profession. That's not what we're doing here in Texas. We are doing an outright ban, most extreme ban in the country, similar to what Republicans did on abortion. And I asked the bill author on the House floor, are there some cases in Texas, it's a big state, are there some cases where a doctor and a parent think that this care is what's necessary, maybe to save a child's life? And he said yes. And I said, but that's banned in your bill. Even in that circumstance, it's banned outright. No European country has banned gender affirming care outright. So Texas is going one step further, ignoring parents, ignoring doctors, and making decisions based on politics, not on science. And I'll say, because I know surgery's been brought up, and this bill is not about surgery, it's about hormone treatments and hormone therapy. But we in Texas allow a child to receive a breast augmentation with parent consent under 18. And breast augmentations have possible side effects, serious side effects for your ability to breastfeed in the future. But we still in the state of Texas allow a child to receive that if the parent signs off. So the fact that we wouldn't do that for gender affirming care shows me this is just about good old fashioned discrimination.
Yeah.
There are over 8,000 bills filed, right, this session, and this is I think you referred to 50. We can all walk and chew gum at the same time, I think. I think that this bill being restrictive on certain kinds of surgeries and hormone blockers and things doesn't exclude the possibility of any of us supporting not having breast augmentation.
So did you advocate for a bill to ban breast augmentations this
I
session?
haven't, but I would support it.
Do you know if any bill was filed to ban breast augmentation?
Not that I'm aware of.
So that's what rings kind of alarm bells off in my head, is the fact that you're not going after procedures that straight kids use, but instead going after procedures that trans kids use. And that just tells me this is about discrimination, not about science.
We do have a lot of topics to go through, so let's jump into the next topic, which is SB 15. This is the new law that expands the transgender student athlete ban from grade school to the college level. And Will, you covered this again.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear what you all think about why this issue gained so much traction. In 2021, we saw the same restrictions to transgender athletes, but in K through 12 schools. And this session, GOP lawmakers took it the next step and extended that restriction to university athletes.
I think time couldn't wait because the stories were there to prove that we needed more protection for our female athletes and that we couldn't just stop when they were in high school. When we get to the college level in sports, the stakes are higher. There's scholarship money, there's name and likeness money, there's even your future career if you want to be an athlete even past college. There's so much more at stake when you're a college woman athlete, and we have to remember the original intent of Title IX in the first place, which is to make sure that women have an equal level playing field in athletics. And we cannot forget the perfect example of Will Thomas in the summer of 2022. That really was the shot heard around the world that showed for the first time an example of a male who is taking opportunities for women in sports.
Senator Eckhart, I want to bring you into this conversation now. What's your response to Mary
I think
Elizabeth?
that we expanded our discrimination against trans athletes to the collegiate arena because it played so well to the base. There is not a university or a college in Texas that has a trans athlete competing currently, indicating that this is not an issue that, while the state has myriad serious issues that affect tens of thousands, even millions of people, that this would be the issue that we would spend our time on is shocking to the point of negligent. The NCAA is more than capable of handling the extremely rare circumstance of a trans athlete rising to that level of play and then finding a case-specific way to right size and level the playing field. State legislation is a completely inappropriate mechanism for that.
I want to see if our audience wants to participate in this conversation. We have someone?
Hi, my name is Leslie, and I guess my first question or comment would be with the bill. Although we know, correct, there are no current trans athletes participating in the collegiate level, we do know across the country there have been other colleges that have had trans athletes take opportunities away from female athletes. That has happened. We've seen it. We've heard from them. So to say it's not here now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be. As well, and then I want to also play in or ask about so I guess my question is, do you see that there is more instances of female erasure? So whenever you, when you have this happening in other states, on top of the heightened level of girls that we're seeing having their healthy breast tissue removed, transitioning female to male with the hormones, do you not see a concern that in a dangerous direction that we're heading into the female erasure, as well as the pharmaceutical companies really playing a role into harming the reproductive systems of these young girls before they've even had a chance to fully develop, mature, and grow?
May I take a shot at that? Female erasure, I hadn't heard that term before. That's an interesting term. And I would submit to you that since on average 3 women per week in Texas are murdered by gun by their domestic partner, and that we no longer have autonomy over our reproductive system, that's a far bigger concern than the incredibly rare instance of a trans athlete at that level of play.
Yeah. We do have sound bites that I want to play. We're going to hear from a couple of former collegiate athletes, one for and one against SB 15. Both of them spoke at the Capitol this session, and here's the argument that each made.
We need to just make sure that we stay focused on the science. We need people to understand that this is not something that is supposed to be taken personal. It is something that is a value that we hold dear to sport. And for the female category to continue to exist, we must make sure that male bodies cannot participate.
After I came out and began my transition, I wanted to run in the men's races. I was taking testosterone, so I had an advantage over female athletes, but I wasn't allowed. I broke records in the women's category and I was belittled for it, but I was ignored when I then asked to run in the category that would be more fair. for both me and for others.
So I think a lot of the times this conversation comes down to fairness, and in those sound bites you see that that's kind of a tricky thing to legislate. So I want to bring that to you guys to see what you have in response.
Well, athletics, particularly competitive athletics, as you have at the collegiate level, is about bodies and skills. It's bodies on bodies. It's not identities on identities. So we have that component of it, and you also have the issue with women being able to consent to who is in their private sex segregated spaces. Title IX exists not only to provide a level playing field when it comes to opportunities, but also to recognize the need for privacy, the need for consent, the need for safety in their spaces. We talked about domestic partners murdering women, and I would venture to guess that a majority of those partners are men that are killing those women. Majority of the sexual assaults that happen are men committing those assaults against women. So having men in our spaces is a total violation of our safety, our privacy, and our consent. So it's not just about the competitive athletics, it's also about the changing rooms and who is allowed to come into those very private spaces where we are very vulnerable.
Speaking of Title IX, the Biden administration expanded the definition of, or the interpretation of Title IX in 2021 to include sexual orientation and gender identities. Just recently, the Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit against that interpretation of Biden's Title IX. Which now falls under SB 15. Is this bill going to stand up basically to the Biden's a ban against blanket transgender athlete bans, do you believe?
So I think this is a great point. Nobody wants men in women's sports. We want trans women to compete with women. We want trans men to compete with men. We just want sports to be inclusive. And again, this bill is an example of big government at its worst, right? We just talked about that the Texas legislature thinks they can parent better than Texas parents. They think they can do medicine better than Texas doctors. And now the legislature thinks they can regulate sports better than the NCAA, right? I mean, the NCAA already has a policy in place, a sports by sport policy to ensure fairness and inclusion at the same time. And the proponents of this bill will admit there is not one documented case of a trans athlete causing a problem on a sports team in Texas. This is a solution in search of a problem. And we've got big problems in this state that we actually need to solve. And to waste our time talking about these anti-trans bill is a disservice to every single Texan.
SB 15 will definitely stand up against the law because if you've been following the Biden administration's rewrite of Title IX, it hasn't been a smooth process at all. Ever since the beginning, they've had to go back for rewrite after rewrite and delay after delay to this point, they still have not implemented their new rule that redefines sex to include gender identity. In fact, at this point, they don't even know if it'll be ready by October. And you even have the Secretary of Education saying that allowing the definition to include gender identity could be a disaster for women's private spaces. At this point, the Biden administration has no clue what they want to do in regards to the definition of sex, and they should just keep it as it is, which is male and female, to ensure fairness in sports. SB 15 has it right. It makes sure that we keep this according to biology to make sure we have fair opportunities. Because at the end of the day, men or women are made biologically different, and we're just protecting those rights so women can have a fair chance at victory.
I want to bring in the audience. I know that there's, Alicia?
Hi, yeah, so I am a survivor of sexual assault myself. It was by a man. It was not in a locker room. The trans community experiences sexual assault at a much higher rate than the cis women community. But also, I would like to agree with some of what was said about ignoring science and biology. So 2% of the world is born intersex like me. That's the same amount of people in the world as have red hair. So if you're watching this and you're like, oh, well, I've never met an intersex person, you have. We're just shoved deeply into the shadows because of bills like the ones that we're talking about today and live deep in the margins of society. I look very female on the outside because despite being born with XY chromosomes, my body doesn't respond to testosterone. And so the testosterone that my internal testes would have produced would have naturally converted to estrogen. And so I don't respond to testosterone every other cis woman in this room has more testosterone in their body than I do, and their bodies respond to it more than mine does. But I competed on women's sports teams my whole life, and I did really well. I was a tri-varsity athlete, despite, again, not responding to testosterone. And just the bottom line is, if we want to make sports more fair, we could easily recategorize the whole thing by weight class or by other categories that actually follow science and the way that bodies work without ignoring, shunning, or discriminating against large swaths of our population in order to, hurt Texans based on pseudoscience.
Michelle, would you like to respond?
You mentioned having a good faith debate. I think good faith debates start in very clear language. You said you don't want men in women's sports. You then said you want trans women to compete with women. Those are conflicting ideas. Trans women are men. I think we need to acknowledge that biological fact if we're going to have any sort of intellectually honest debate about this. Men who have gone, or males who have gone through exposure to testosterone in the womb, through a male puberty, or even if they've grown male, they've competed against males their entire lives, I think it's important to recognize that they do have a physical advantage over women, even if they're given wrong sex hormones, even if they're given puberty blockers, that advantage remains in a vast majority of cases. And the SB 15 and the bill, I think it was HB 25, the previous session, recognize the birth certificate, and the birth certificate bills that have been proposed all recognize DSDs, intersex Texans. So I think we can bridge that gap there by recognizing that these conditions do exist, these people do exist. Nobody's banning anybody from any athletics. You can play. You can continue to play in the sport based on your biological sex.
I know we have another, go ahead.
What would you think about asking the experts, NCAA, to take a look at weight classes and aspects of an athletic cohort that actually have relevance to the level of play,
How
rather
does that solve
than
the problem of private spaces?
Well, because if you want to be intellectually honest, your assertion that it is a violation of private space for a trans woman to be in a woman's locker room is completely specious. You seem to predicate it on the idea that a trans woman has a high likelihood of sexually assaulting women in the locker room, which is, I haven't heard of such a thing. And also, I would wonder, do you think that women in a locker room should take a questionnaire as to their sexual identity as well?
No.
And you wouldn't want lesbian women in the locker room because that would be a violation of your privacy?
No, absolutely not, because I predicate this on statistics, that men have a higher likelihood towards aggression, towards violence, and they are the main drivers of sexual assault against women.
Have you looked at the incidence of sexual assaultive behavior by trans women?
You have to, if you can't define what gender identity is, if there are no boundaries for gender identity, who is then accepted? Is it the person that passes? Is it the person that has a very deeply held belief? How do we define that? And then how do we define who gets into women's sex segregated spaces that exist for privacy and safety? If we don't have those definitions, if we don't have boundaries there, then the risk still exists.
So
you cannot identify out of that risk.
You just said you want to base this on statistics. So this bill just passed. That means throughout all of Texas history, we operated with inclusion in sports. Trans women competing with women, trans men competing with men. So how many documented cases of a trans athlete causing a problem on a sports team in Texas exist?
How many would have to exist in order for you to think that this is worthy?
I'm asking, if you're pushing this bill,
I don't
how many
think there has to be a case
so
documented in Texas.
Well, let me rephrase it then. Are there any cases where a trans athlete has caused a problem on a sports team in Texas?
I don't think there has to be that occasion.
Is that a no? That's a zero? There are no cases where a trans athlete has caused a problem on a sports team in Texas?
I think that
Okay. I think I got my answer. If we're going to base things on stats, we should base them on
female
true
teams.
statistics.
Absolutely. And we talk about the NCAA being a capable organization. They completely flubbed what happened with UPenn swimmer Will Thomas by telling the women that felt uncomfortable with a fully intact male in their private space that they needed to go to counseling. That's not a capable organization.
But are you seeing why viewers are probably realizing this is more about a culture war than actually solving a problem if there are no statistics of there being a problem anywhere in Texas of a trans athlete causing a problem on a sports team?
If there were no murders in Texas, would we still have a law against murder?
Yes.
Okay.
And
we
so-
don't
and-
have to have these
and that's-
things before we create laws to prevent them from
if I'm
happening.
making policy based on criminal justice issues or crime, I'm going to look at crime statistics.
Mhm.
And the fact that you're pushing this bill knowing that there's not an actual problem to be solved, it suggests to the rest of us this is more about scoring political points off the backs of trans people.
I'm not scoring any political points. I'm not an elected official and have no aspirations beyond when I ran last year. So this is
But
not.
you ran for office, though.
I did, but and this was an issue that I did bring up, but I did not win that race. I acknowledge that. I enjoyed running, but I won't do it again. I'm not trying to score political points with anybody.
I think we should just solve problems that actually exist.
I do want to bring in an audience member into this conversation. Celia?
Hey. Sorry. Before my question, I would like to say trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary people are valid. And with that idea that you were saying that there is a problem with trans people in sports, I believe there is one. It is the fact that the NCAA wrestling champion, I believe of 2022, was on the female side was a trans man who was taking testosterone, who was going through his transition, who continuously asked and asked and asked, please put me with the men. That is what my body is. This are the hormones coursing through my veins and through my body. But because of certain bills and the things that have been passed, he's been blocked from doing that. So of course he has an advantage. So if you really want to talk about athletic fairness, then why are we not talking about these experiences where trans people are asking for fairness and trans people want to compete on the team that they see fit, where they feel like they know they have an advantage due to their transition. They want to do that. But these bills are effectively blocking them from doing that. Do you see how there could be holes in these bills that because of the forward discrimination, because of the lack of research that they do behind actually speaking to trans athletes, speaking to trans people, speaking to medical professionals, athletic professionals, do you see how these bills are constantly being written under the guise of, oh, well, we're just trying to help people, but they're not actually doing what they should be?
Yeah, I want to see if the GOP, Williamson County GOP, maybe if you go and respond to Celia. Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
I have a daughter, and I've been listening this whole time, and you know, people are going back and forth. It's a tough situation. I'll just say that because I'm listening here, and you know, for example, Alicia, she says that 2%. I mean, I think, in my opinion, her situation should be addressed. I mean, I think it's something that she had you can't say, oh, well, she chose or didn't choose. That's just who she was. But I have a daughter, and whether Michelle made the argument about, that men have a propensity for being aggressive, whether the person is aggressive or not, they could be the sweetest person in the whole world. I do not want my daughter having to see an intact male in her area of where she may be undressed. I just don't want that. And I feel for people that are having to work through this situation, but my daughter has a right to feel comfortable when she is naked. She has a right to choose when she will be in the presence of an intact male in her life. And so I do feel for all the different opinions, but as a parent and as a mom of a daughter, I can't support them having access to her when she's in her private spaces.
Do you want to, either of you want to respond to that parent? Is that?
I am a parent. I have 2 children. Both of them played sports in high school. One of them plays in college intramural. And I have sympathy for your position, particularly in light of the fact, and this is a fact, that when you are a trans teenager, you don't get bottom surgery. So yes, if you are in the incredibly rare circumstance that is so rare that we don't even have the circumstance in Texas currently, that you would have a quote intact, you would have a transgender female who had not yet had bottom surgery in a dressing room, and it's just the likelihood is so remote. But yes, in that circumstance, I could see that special accommodations should be made. And I think that is easily handled and without legislation.
Yeah, I know. I want to bring in Alicia. She wants to say something, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm also a survivor of sexual assault. I don't want to put anyone in harm's way ever, but why is the response not to teach our men to be better rather than to discriminate against large swaths of the population? Trans and gay people can no more help being born trans or gay than I could help being born intersex, and help makes it sounds like something we want to help. I'm proud to be intersex. I know Celia's proud to dress in drag and do her thing, express herself. I'm a proud member of the full LGBTQI plus community. We're not aberrations that need to be fixed. We're people that need to be accepted into society. The real issue here sounds like one of sexual assault, which is a very, very real issue. And to me, it's like, it would be a whole lot easier to raise our men to respect women and treat us with dignity than it would be to just completely eradicate everyday Texans from basic aspects of society, like playing on a sports team or getting the health care they need to remain healthy.
Yeah, there's maybe any reactions? Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's missing in this conversation, and I've heard a lot of mention of testosterone and even with the wrestler, but the difference in men and women in sports isn't just a matter of testosterone. It's a matter of muscle mass, it's a matter of bone structure, lung capacity, heart capacity. All of these things have been revealed in the past few years of the physical, biological differences between men and women that really can't just be changed by testosterone or even just hormone therapy for even a year. So there are a lot of innate differences between men and women in sports that prove that even the best female athlete, they did a study where Allison Felix, even though she's the fastest woman in the world, can still be beat by 150 high school boys. So these are differences that are just natural and biological, but that's why we need to make sure our women can win.
I do want to move on. We are running out of time, so I want to cover this last topic. The legislation that the governor's signature he gave at the last second, SB 12. At one point, it was being referred to as the Texas drag ban. Well, this went through several revisions, which you detail in your latest article.
Yeah, so we saw that drag ban originally include direct reference to men dressing as women and women dressing as men in drag. Lawmakers later stripped that language from the bill, citing that it wasn't necessary to protect children from sexually explicit performances. Yet, last-minute negotiations that often happen in the legislature reintroduced language that activists say will target drag queens based on the accessories and prosthetics that they use in their shows. I'm curious, does this bill actually protect children, and why are we targeting drag queens in this last-minute edition?
Well, I mean, we have an amazing Texas drag queen here with us tonight. She doesn't look like the boogeyman, I think, that she's supposed to look like. She looks pretty harmless to me. But, all of us want any kind of performance or show or concert or movie that children attend to be age appropriate. And that's true for any art form. It's true for books, it's true for films, it's true for music, it's true for drag. But this bill, as you just mentioned, it was filed to discriminate against drag performances. And again, these bills are always dressed up with these different slogans of protecting children or save women's sports, right? But once you kind of dig in under the slogan, once you kind of get to the next level of detail, you realize that these bills are what we've seen throughout history. They're discrimination against people who are different, against people who are weak or marginalized. The way I know that these bills are about discrimination is because if we're talking about women's sports, this legislature failed to use $33 billion in surplus to provide a pay raise for coaches across the state or to increase funding for athletics programs. So that's how I know it's not really about the slogan. It's just about discrimination, which we've seen throughout our history.
Maybe we can get our drag queen to. Wonderful.
Okay.
Again, it seems like there's a lot of assumptions being made. I have gone to drag shows in my life. I think that they're, fun entertainment. But when I see in Round Rock, where we had a young child with a hashtag killing the bikini, I believe, if I remember it correctly, performing in front of adults, and then accepting money. I do not remember any time in history where we've had, and people have been okay with kids accepting money and dancing suggestively in front of adults. Can
you clarify, where did this happen? Can you give us a bit more context?
It was in Round Rock, their Pride celebration.
Okay.
There was a young person that was performing. And again, the parent can choose what they do and what they allow with their child. But when it comes to that child representing an act that has historically been an adult act, how can we be okay with that as a society? And why do we have to go to such big extremes? There is expressing yourself, and then there is just, in my mind, it's just beyond. It's just beyond.
See if Senator Eckhart or Representative Tallarico want to respond to that, parent?
That would not be covered by this bill, I don't believe, and that is concerning. And I, as a parent, I too saw the sexualizing of children as something disturbing in the extreme. We have laws on the books for that. This bill, however, is about adult performers, and it is vulnerable to being struck down because of constitutional infirmity, because there have been decades upon decades upon decades of case law with regard to obscenity, appropriately looking into community standards and what is considered obscene. And this bill does not track that, and that also gives credence to the idea that this bill was not about protecting children from obscenity. It was about marginalizing a specific group of performers because they are from the LGBTQIA community.
And just to underscore that, straight people in Texas have put their kids in child beauty pageants, put them in gowns and swimsuits for money, and straight people were fine with it throughout all of Texas history. Then all of a sudden you got gay kids doing drag, and now we need emergency legislation by the Texas legislature. Again, it just kind of stinks of hypocrisy.
Michelle or Mary?
Well, I like Laura, when, especially, being in Austin in my 20s, I went to drag performances. They were adult-oriented, adult audiences, 21 plus crowds. I think when you have much like with the case of Will Thomas and the swimmers that he competed against, there's just such a jarring imagery there. And the performance that was in Dallas at a bar, a 21 and up bar, normally 21 and up, during Pride last year, where women are bringing their kids in, and there are drag performers barely clothed in front of a sign that says it's not going to lick itself. I think that kind of imagery really does shock a majority of Texans. And so I would say that anybody that's performing in front of a sign that says that's involving children in that performance, whether it's a drag performer or someone that's not in drag, I don't find it to be appropriate. So I want to respond in that way, that it's not about who the performer is or what that performer's private life is like. It's about the fact that kids are being involved in things that are overtly sexualized.
Do you think parents can be trusted to handle this, whether it's TikTok, concert tickets to go see Miley Cyrus, or a drag story time?
I think that we have long in Texas held that there are certain situations where the state does allow itself to become involved in certain parenting decisions. We don't allow any parent to do anything that they want with their child, right? There are certain boundaries. But I just wanted to respond to the what was driving, I think, as somebody who has gone to drag performances in the past, what was kind of driving this bill.
I do want to bring Celia Light into this conversation. Do you have the mic?
I'll say this very quickly. I'm an entertainer. I'm a drag queen. It is no different than Chris Rock doing a raunchy comedy show at midnight on a Friday than going to do a meet and greet with a bunch of kids for a Madagascar movie on a Sunday. I'm an entertainer. I know how to put what I do into a context that's appropriate for children. But the broader language of this bill doesn't just include drag, it also could discriminate against trans people. A trans person who is not had their birth certificate changed or their license changed, and they're in a theater and they're doing a production of Chicago or a production of Rocky Horror. These kinds of bills are so broad, but they directly discriminate against people who just don't see this as overtly sexual. What I do is not overtly sexual. My name is Celia Light. How sexual do you think I am at a show? I know how to contour what I do to a group of 21-year-olds at a bar on a Saturday, and then when I go read to children on a Sunday.
All right. I think that does it for us. I mean, we've had a really good discussion for the past hour. This is Sinclair's Town Hall, Your Voice, Your Future, the all and y'all. We want to thank our audience for being here, as well as our panel of lawmakers and community members. Thank you to Will Mojado with the Texas Tribune for being here as well. The viewers at home, thank you so much for joining us.